so much. I'm very happy, really very happy to be amongst you today because it's been a long collaboration between the Africa Digital Rights Hub and Mauritius Data Protection Office since the foundation of the hub. As you know, we were the country which co-hosted the first event for the Africa Digital Rights Hub. And I'm sure everyone is seeing me and hearing me. I hope so. That's the best I can do for today. Yes, let me put you in the picture because I think the update from all the regulators is very important in terms of understanding the evolution of data protection in the African region. And to really center my discussion on this aspect, I would like to say that we actually in the African continent, we have done much. We are doing much in terms of really, promoting data protection compliance. We shouldn't be pessimistic as some people are, like Africa will not be able to cope with data protection compliance. I think many countries, as you know, as rightly pointed out before, have embarked on creating data protection authorities. Some of them are very well furnished with adequate resources and financial independence, and also the functional independence of the office. But certainly, as has been the journey for Mauritius, it's a very hectic journey for data protection. I always say that data protection is something that people have difficulty to comprehend as an area of law. And that has created a lot of confusion around data protection. You know how it all started, like in Europe 50 years ago, people wanted to merge data protection with human rights or with IT security or with other components like copyright, intellectual property. So it never actually achieved a place on its own until Europe came with the directives, with now the EU GDPR, Convention 108. So these are actually the foundational blocks on which we can rely to say, yes, data protection is indeed an area of law. But in the African continent, to be able to make people, to educate and train people to understand that data protection is something that is gaining so much of importance that we cannot ignore it or we cannot merge it with other concepts. That is something which is taking time to achieve. But as I said, the journey has already started, and I'm happy to see a lot of progress in the African continent. Starting with Mauritius, as you know, our office started 14 years ago, and we had difficulties and constraints like any other data protection authority is facing in the world, and we still do. But the important lesson to learn is that you should never give up, because this is all a process, a journey that has to be made meaningful by the regulator, by the private sector collaboration, public sector, governments, international organizations. It's all part in one basket. And there's nothing like, you can exclude that sector or that collaborator. You need all of them working together. And in a way, collaboration is key. If we don't do that, and like we are doing right now, this is very interesting to see that Africa Digital Rights Hub has private collaborators since the start. But we have to understand everyone has got their own roles and responsibilities in this picture here, in this landscape. And if we don't merge our efforts, we're not going to make data protection really give importance to what data protection should bring in the African continent. Let me just peruse, give you a small purview of what I believe the African Union is doing a great job. I myself, I'm being highly solicited by the African Union for many meetings. I would like to give you some ideas, like the Africa Digital Single Market. The project, it's so well made, and we are actually, myself, I gave my input on it, and we're moving towards the digital single market to be able to leverage data protection and economic interests on a scale that do not, trump over each other. And also like the harmonization PRIDA project of data protection laws in the African Union. This has already started. Again, Mauritius is very well actively involved in this. Mauritius is actually the first country which is going to polish and give all the inputs that you will see in due course, that Mauritius is the first country which has provided all the details, and very soon we'll get a nice result on compliance scaling for Mauritius. And so many other guidelines, as you know, on the African continent, not to neglect the model SADC laws, the ECOWAS principles, the African personal data protection guidelines, and what jurisprudence we can bring out from the African Court on Human Rights. Excuse me. Yes, I heard a noise. So I was just focusing on what the African Union is doing and is actually going to improve on its efforts. And this is the place where actually we can reunite all African regulators, not to neglect also the African network, Francophone network, also now involving Anglophone countries, le réseau africain des autorités de protection des données personnelles, the African network. Now the Ghanaian commissioner is actually the president, and we also collaborate as well, Mauritius. I would like also to see the network, do a little bit more activity. It has just started some 2-3 years ago, so it's really new. But we should give, the timings correctly to the commissioner to be able to do her job. But I would like to see that the network really bring together all African regulators, and we actually come up with certain, the GPA is doing, the Global Privacy Assembly does resolutions, types of guidelines, and these types of documents that can help, because we have a lot in Mauritius, as you know, guidelines, we can help, we can assist. So this is just to put you in the picture in what's happening on the continent. And also, I really appreciate the private initiatives that are being, undertaken on the continent to be able to make people understand how important data protection is in a post-COVID situation, and how health data and biometric data are really the center of our attention and the most important aspects right now in data protection. If you want me just to give you now a small highlight about how Mauritius operates its functions. As you know, since 2004, our law catered for, criminal sanctioning of all the offenses, all the violations of the Data Protection Act in Mauritius. And we also have a dedicated section on the complete independence of the office. The new Data Protection Act of 2018 that has been enacted in Mauritius is completely in line with the EU GDPR and Convention 108 Plus. Mauritius is also the first country to have ratified the Convention 108 Plus, and it's a very good example for the continent, because I'm sure many other African countries will embark on this initiative, and I really support it. Why? Because Convention 108 Plus, as you know, is the only treaty which is binding right now, And it's the only treaty which has got certain principles which everybody can actually rely on. In contrast to what the EU GDPR provides, as you know, the framework of the EU GDPR is more complex, is more demanding, and is so detailed that it's actually very difficult to implement all of it. But the essence of the principles of the EU GDPR are very important and relevant in the African context as well. So in that particular score, I would like to say that I suggested that the Malabo Convention be updated because it is, pre-COVID, it is pre-Convention 108 Plus, and it is pre-EU GDPR. So update is very important for the Malabo Convention. And I've suggested that we do take into account definitely what international principles we have, including GDPR and Convention 108 Plus and UN data protection principles and reports, and what's happening regionally as well, Asia Pacific, other parts of the world, including the American context, to see how practical trade agreements are being concluded between US and other parts of Africa. They're also very relevant to secure a complete picture of what data protection should look at from a global perspective. Let us not forget, what we're all aiming at is a global, respect for data protection, coming from respectful institutions, respectful principles, and principles that can be applied in any context. So this is very important for us to remember that beyond the African continent is this main goal that we are all looking up to, and this is what we should actually prioritize. I'm very sorry, I have a small problem with my throat. Yes, so this is what I wanted to say on the global, the regional, the international perspective. And Mauritius, as I highlighted, this criminal sanctioning system has helped us a lot in securing compliance, because as compared to administrative sanctioning, that is fines of hefty, millions or billions of dollars and euros, and in now Mauritian rupees, all these are very good for multinational companies, for private sector. But those small, SMEs, what we call them, or MS something, sorry. So these small, companies or organizations, they do not fit in that picture. Even if they have 40 people working with them, 50 people working, even if they have that type of turnover, like the EU GDPR targets, we have to be realistic. That's why in Mauritius, we chose, that's how we have always been, but we chose to continue criminal sanctioning because we believe that it will be very difficult for all companies operating in Mauritius to pay these sums of money to international organizations or private sector bodies, or even the EU GDPR context. All these, you see how complex it can become. So that's why we have fines and imprisonment under our law. But I also focused on the independence of the office, as I told you earlier, and we put a lot of emphasis on this. It's not an easy job because political will, political support in data protection is something we have to work on and on and on and build. And it takes a lot of years to convince and persuade governments that yes, you do have an institution, now we have to move to the next level and the other level. There are so many levels that we have to accomplish. And it's not an easy job. I have 15 years of experience almost in this area. To be able, as you know, to bring a law to Parliament, how difficult it is. We have been able to, revamp our whole legislation, do a new one with a lot of pressure, with a lot of convincing, persuasion, and a lot of personal input in this work. So I'm just sharing with you personally what it is. Right, we used to be under the Prime Minister's office, but with the new government, now we are found under the Ministry of Information and Technology. But the ministry is just the, we are under the aegis of the ministry. We are not directly linked to the ministry. We operate fully independent, but we have certain budgetary, procedures and administrative procedures that we have to follow with the ministry. And that is the case for all institutions in Mauritius, whether you're independent or not. And our budget is funded by the government, and we do rely a lot now. Let me give you an idea about how much money we collected this year from our revenues on registration dues and for data controllers and data processors. It's around, I think, 21 million rupees. It's definitely not a small sum of money, but the budget that is given to the Data Protection Office is independent of that sum. But if we have to solicit the government for more funds, then we get the money. We do have all these facilities. And also, I would like to highlight that, Mauritius has always been a little bit on the forefront of everything. And now we have embarked on the discussions with the EU for adequacy. We have already had several meetings. We are in the process of appointing a consultant. My office is actually preparing a report to be submitted to the EU Data Protection Directorate on how Mauritius operates its data protection framework. This is being done currently, and very soon we will see some developments in this particular area. It takes a lot of time. Even the EU adequacy, I'm sure our African regulators are listening to me and they know what I'm talking about. It takes a lot of time, but we are trying to make sure that we are doing it as fast as we can. But also here, it's very important to say that not everything is in the hands of the regulator. Like I submitted the proposal to the ministry for the EU adequacy consultant to be appointed. It's the ministry which will appoint the consultant. So upon our advice, etc. But we cannot do everything on our side. We have to wait. And that's where I say, political support, administrative support are very important. If you don't have this, then, life can be very difficult as a regulator. But I would like now to highlight a little bit about, certain principles like the African, Continental Free Trade Agreement. I think that is a very important, a document that all African regulators and private sector as well should really focus on, because this is where, trade is being done between countries within Africa and beyond Africa. And that's very important to, for regulators to implement data protection clauses in this process. At the level of the African Union, this is being done. But now at the national level, you should really inspire yourself from what's happening in this trade agreement perspective and bring it to your country and bring the principles to your office, to the regulators' work schedules, and make trade agreements like that, so that there is a harmonization of principles between what the African Union is targeting and what your country is targeting. That is very important to make, to synchronize our efforts and our work on this particular aspect. And also, I think finally, I would just like to add that, right now we have many constraints on the African continent. That is, independence is not always the case. So dependence is a major constraint, right? Financial constraints, as I highlighted before, that inadequacy, fragmentation of laws across our continent, will lead to a lot of problems. We have to ensure that we follow what African Union is doing in terms of harmonization. That is very important. We may have enacted a law, but we have to update and harmonize with current trending principles. Lack of resources, institutional capacity. This is a problem which is plaguing all data protection authorities across the world. And we still don't have all the solutions to this problem. Legislative standards. Now, practical standards, codes of practice, guidelines. When you cannot, look up to bringing new elements in legislative standards, you should aim to be practical and pragmatic. And that's where codes of practice, contracts, agreements, they all have their big value. Thank you so much for listening to me. I hope I have been very clear and everyone has been able to hear me out. And again, sorry for my attire today. Thank you. Thank you.